The stars hung cold and distant over the glassy expanse of the Draken system, their light fractured through the armored domes of the human diplomatic cruiser. Princess Valera of the Ithari Empire stared at the glittering points with a kind of detached wonder, as if she were looking at frozen fire. For centuries, her people had ruled their sector with precision and inevitability, their fleets moving like chess pieces across the void, each ship a reflection of their unmatched tactical acumen. Yet here she was, a royal born to dominance, bound by politics to an unpredictable human named Commander Rylan Cade. She had been wary when first briefed on the Alliance marriage. Humans were messy, loud, undisciplined, but their kind had a habit of surviving where the Ithari. She had been skeptical then, but curiosity, that dangerous human-tinged emotion, had a way of seeping in. The ceremony had been simple, almost a mockery of what the Ithari considered noble ritual. A small council chamber aboard the cruiser, witnesses from both empires, and a single translator to smooth over the gaps in language and etiquette. Valera's heart had remained guarded as Rylan took her hand. He was human, yes, but not like the others she had encountered on her previous missions. He carried a confidence that bordered on recklessness, and a calmness that defied expectation. There had been no grand speech, no pomp, just a quiet declaration and a sharp, piercing gaze that made her feel seen in a way the Ithari Council never had. She had met countless nobles of her own species who prided themselves on precision and protocol. Yet Rylan's eyes suggested he understood the absurdity of pretense. They had been paired for diplomacy, a move to prevent war with the Sarthak, a neighboring species that had long envied the Ithari's territorial control. The Sarthak fleet was vast, bristling with weapons that could obliterate planets, their generals confident in the superiority of their numbers. They underestimated humans, and humans were exactly the variable the Ithari needed. Rylan had made it clear in his briefing that he didn't care about tradition or hierarchy. He cared about outcomes. When Valera had questioned his methods, he simply smiled and said, "Sometimes the right thing isn't what's expected. You'll see." That confidence, audacious and infuriating, made her pulse quicken with a mixture of irritation and intrigue. The journey to the Sarthak border had been tense. Valera, unused to the cramped and chaotic quarters of a human vessel, found herself forced into proximity with her husband in ways that the Ithari deemed improper. He moved through the corridors with a casual assurance that unnerved her, leaning against bulkheads, running a hand through his dark hair, talking to crew as though they were equals rather than subordinates. The humans were rough, their manners jagged, but efficient, and despite her pride, Valera had to admit that their efficiency had its merits. In moments of danger drills, she watched them respond instinctively, adapting to failure rather than letting it define them. She had spent decades in a society that punished error above all else, and she felt a strange, uncomfortable envy. As the cruiser approached the Sarthak perimeter, tension coiled in the air like a living thing. The Ithari sensors lit up with the presence of hundreds of enemy ships, massive warframes that dwarfed even the largest human cruisers. Valera felt a familiar surge of anxiety, the same she experienced before every council assembly, but sharper this time. It was life and death, not abstract politics. Rylan leaned over the console beside her, his fingers drumming on the surface as he studied the holographic display. "They expect a show of force," he said quietly, "but they don't expect ingenuity, and that's where humans win." Every time Valera studied him, a flicker of skepticism in her sharp, violet eyes. "And what makes you think you can outthink an entire fleet?" "My people have never failed to predict enemy movements." Rylan shrugged, his gaze calm, almost bored. "Because humans don't play predictable. You see a pattern, we break it. You rely on perfection, we rely on improvisation. There's a difference." She wanted to argue, to remind him that improvisation was dangerous and reckless, but the conviction in his tone stopped her. There was a clarity, a certainty that was utterly alien to the rigid logic of her people. She found herself watching him with a mixture of irritation and admiration. Perhaps the council had been right, humans were strange, but valuable. The first skirmish was smaller than expected. A scouting fleet from the Sarthak tested the perimeter, firing brief warning volleys, but Rylan handled it with an almost casual ease. Valera watched from the observation deck, her heart hammering as human ships darted and weaved between enemy fire, responding faster than she had thought possible. They didn't follow the standard formations she knew so well. Instead, they used unpredictability to their advantage, striking where the Sarthak assumed nothing would be. By the time the engagement ended, several enemy vessels were incapacitated. Ryland's face was unreadable, but Valera noticed the faintest trace of a smirk. Later, in the dimly lit briefing room, the two of them studied the larger fleet. The Sarthak were massing for a decisive strike, confident that the human and Ithari forces would crumble under superior firepower. Valera could see the arrogance in their approach, the same hubris her own empire had once wielded, and she felt a twinge of apprehension. Ryland, however, leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head, as though the weight of hundreds of ships did not touch him. "They don't know what humans can do," he said, almost to himself. "Not even your sensors can fully predict it." Valera narrowed her eyes. "Explain yourself." He tapped a few coordinates into the holographic console. "This isn't about brute force. It's about understanding the enemy's expectations and then ignoring them completely. Humans see openings where others see walls." She watched as the simulation unfolded, her pulse quickening. The tactics were audacious, almost suicidal by Ithari standards, but there was genius in the simplicity. The human ships, under Ryland's guidance, moved in ways that defied conventional logic, using minimal force to create maximal disruption. It was the kind of strategy that required instinct, trust, and nerves of steel, a combination the Ithari seldom cultivated in their officers. For the first time, Valera felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope, perhaps. Against the impossible, humans might be the edge they needed. Night cycles aboard the cruiser passed in a blur. Valera, despite her pride, found herself drawn to Ryland's presence. He was a paradox, irreverent and daring, yet precise and calculating when it mattered most. They spoke in hushed tones about the approaching battle, about their people, about the strange intersections of duty and morality. He did not seek to impress her with flattery. Instead, he listened, questioned, and occasionally challenged her assumptions in ways that left her unsettled, yet strangely invigorated. She found herself laughing at his dry humor, marveling at the audacity of his plans, and, despite herself admiring his courage, when the alarm finally sounded, indicating the Sarthak main fleet had entered sensor range, Valera's heart raced. She had prepared for diplomacy, for negotiation, for careful maneuvering in the corridors of power. She had not prepared for the chaos of war. Not in this way. The cruiser shuddered as the first wave of enemy fire reached them, though their shields held. Ryland's voice cut through the comms, calm and commanding. "All hands, hold your positions. Trust your instincts. And remember, we're not fighting fair." Valera's eyes met his across the command deck, and for a moment, the politics, the alliances, the centuries of tradition, all of it felt distant. This was survival, raw and immediate, and in that moment, she realized something undeniable. The humans, led by this one audacious man, might just be the X-factor her people needed. The first strike came swiftly, precisely, and unpredictably. Human ships darted through enemy lines, exploiting gaps the Sarthak had assumed impossible. Ryland coordinated with an instinctive understanding, predicting enemy maneuvers before they even began. Valera watched in awe as several massive warframes were neutralized with minimal effort, their destructive potential shredded by what looked like improvisation, but was, in fact, brilliance. Her chest tightened as she realized the magnitude of what she was witnessing. In the observation window, the stars seemed to streak with motion, the battlefield alive with energy and chaos. Valera felt her pulse synchronize with the rhythm of the fight. Each strike, each evasive maneuver, each calculated risk. She could no longer see Ryland as merely a human prince of convenience. He was a force of nature, a catalyst that had turned the tide before the true battle had even begun. When the initial wave of engagement ended, the Sarthak fleet had sustained significant losses, and their confidence was visibly shaken. Ryland turned to Valera, expression calm but eyes sharp. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The real work starts when they realize they can't predict us, and that's when humans make history." Valera, for the first time in her life, felt a spark of genuine excitement, not for diplomacy, not for protocol, not for ceremony, but for the raw, untamed possibility of what humans could achieve. She realized that this marriage, this alliance, was not just political, it was a bridge between logic and instinct, between tradition and audacity, and if they survived the coming storm, the universe would never see their kind the same way again. The cruiser powered up for the next engagement, lights flickering across the deck. Valera stood beside Ryland, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time, she felt not like a pawn, not like a princess, but but like a partner in something larger, something that defied centuries of expectation. The stars outside the window seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the universe itself held its breath for the moment when humans would unleash what no one, not even the Sarthak, had anticipated. And in that tense silence, Valera understood a truth that her people rarely acknowledged. Humans were unpredictable, uncontainable, and terrifyingly brilliant. The void beyond the cruiser's shields was a canvas of deadly potential, black and unyielding except for the glint of enemy warframes lining the horizon. Valera could feel the tension in the air like static, her senses alert to every movement of the human crew around her. Commander Rylan Cade paced the bridge with measured steps, not frantic but deliberate, as if he carried the weight of the fleet in his stride. He glanced at her, those sharp, piercing eyes carrying a confidence that seemed impossible under the looming threat of the Sarthak armada. "You'll want to pay attention now," he said, voice calm. "Everything we do from here on out will make the difference between survival and extinction, and between survival and proving that humans are something the galaxy hasn't fully understood yet." Valera's pulse quickened. She had seen humans in simulations, in trade disputes, in minor skirmishes, but nothing like this. She had trained in fleet tactics, had studied centuries of interstellar warfare, and yet even she felt an unsettling edge of fear. Rylan didn't seem afraid. Fear was a luxury. He seemed to operate on instinct and certainty, the kind of unwavering confidence that could rally the most timid soldier. The first wave of Sarthak scouts had been manageable, but this was different. Hundreds of capital ships now stretched across the void, each bristling with energy weapons capable of tearing her own cruiser to shreds in seconds. "Status report," Rylan called, snapping her back to duty. "Shields holding, all systems green," the tactical officer replied. "Enemy fleet fully engaged in formation, weapons charged." Scanning for weaknesses, Rylan's fingers danced across the holographic interface, plotting vectors, rerouting power, and issuing silent commands to the human ships. His mind worked like a machine and a living organism simultaneously, calculating trajectories, predicting enemy responses, and adapting strategies on the fly. Valera felt a strange awe watching him. Where the Athari relied on rigid formations, expecting obedience and precision, Rylan thrived on chaos, bending unpredictability into a weapon. The Sarthak were confident in their superiority, their immense ships slowly maneuvering into positions designed to corner the human fleet. They did not know that humans thrived under pressure, that they could think in dimensions the Sarthak had never considered. When the first volley of enemy fire hit, human ships had already shifted into new vectors, exploiting blind spots that the Sarthak assumed impossible. Explosions rocked the void, yet the humans moved like a choreographed storm, each ship appearing almost simultaneously in multiple locations, striking where the enemy had left weaknesses exposed. Valera found herself gripping the console, unable to look away. Each maneuver seemed reckless until the results became visible. Enemy vessels crippled before they could unleash their weapons, entire squadrons rendered useless by what appeared at first glance to be audacity. Rylan's calm voice cut through the coms. "Focus on the gaps, not the bulk. We don't need to destroy everything, just disrupt their confidence. Chaos is a weapon." She nodded, though she barely understood the depth of his plan. It was unlike anything she had studied. The Athari had always relied on overwhelming force or flawless precision. Rylan had none of that concern. He relied on surprise, ingenuity, and instinct. And it worked. The Sarthak command was faltering, their captains confused by attacks from directions they didn't anticipate, ships disappearing or exploding without warning. Valera caught a flicker of admiration in the human officers around her. They trusted Rylan implicitly, moving as one under his guidance. Each action measured yet free, precise yet unpredictable. There was a rhythm to it, a flow she had never witnessed in her rigid, hierarchical fleet. She realized that humans weren't just adaptable, they were alive in ways the Athari had never allowed themselves to be. Then came the turning point. A massive Sarthak dreadnought moved toward the cruiser, its size dwarfing anything Valera had seen, bristling with energy cannons capable of obliterating the bridge in an instant. Panic might have spread in a Athari fleet, but not here. Rylan's eyes gleamed. "Target the pylons," he said simply. "Not the hull, the support structures. Trust me." Valera watched, unsure. The humans split their formation, smaller ships weaving between massive weapons fire, striking the dreadnought with pinpoint accuracy at structural weak points. Explosions ripped through its pylons, the ship shuddering as its massive frame became unstable. The Sarthok commander was visibly rattled, unable to comprehend the precision with which humans had attacked a vessel so far beyond their apparent capability. Rylan leaned back, voice low but sharp. "They're learning the hard way. Humans don't fight like anyone else. This is where our advantage begins." For hours, the battle raged. Valera felt exhaustion gnawing at her nerves, yet she couldn't tear her eyes away from the chaos of the fight. Human ingenuity was on full display. Ships moved unpredictably, using environmental debris, solar radiation fields, and gravitational anomalies to their advantage. Where Ithari calculations assumed uniformity and predictability, humans adapted, exploiting every opportunity with reckless precision. Valera realized that the Sarthak, for all their technological superiority, were rigid thinkers. They calculated for probabilities, for expectations, for repetition. Humans thrived where expectations failed. And then Rylan did something extraordinary. He issued a command to the cruiser that seemed suicidal at first glance: full speed into the center of the Sarthak formation. The officers hesitated. The bridge filled with a sudden, tense silence. "Commander, we'll be obliterated," one whispered. Rylan's grin was faint, sharp, unyielding. "Not if we break the pattern." With that, the cruiser accelerated, cutting through enemy lines with impossible timing. Human ships followed, exploiting the brief confusion, striking the command vessels of the Sarthak fleet. Valera felt her stomach drop as massive energy blasts whined past the shields, each near miss a heartbeat away from destruction. And yet, against all odds, the maneuver worked. The Sarthak flagship was hit precisely at its control nexus, systems failing one by one as panic spread through their ranks. Valera could hardly comprehend it. The humans had taken a fleet larger than her own entire planetary defense force and turned it into chaos. Rylan's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the noise. "Focus fire, protect the cruiser, and remember the enemy is only as strong as their confidence. Strip that away, and victory is ours." Hours blurred into each other. The Sarthok launched wave after wave of attacks, but human adaptability and Rylan's brilliance kept them alive. Valera found herself giving orders she had never dreamed she would consider, trusting instincts rather than protocol, following a rhythm that was alien yet compelling. Each success built on the last, a cascade of innovation and daring that she had never associated with her people. The turning point came when the Sarthok attempted to regroup, forming a concentrated strike aimed at overwhelming the human fleet. Rylan anticipated it before it happened, repositioning ships to lure the enemy into a trap. Hidden from the enemy's sensors were experimental human drones, capable of coordinating attacks faster than any biological mind could manage. They struck simultaneously at the dreadnought's engines, leaving the Sarthok immobile and vulnerable. Valera watched, her heart pounding, as the first of the massive ships exploded, followed by another, and then another, each destruction sending waves of panic through the enemy lines. She felt an unfamiliar surge of exhilaration. This was not war as she had known it, not structured, predictable, or sterile. This was alive, raw, and terrifyingly effective. And at the center of it, guiding the chaos, was Rylan. The humans were rewriting the rules of engagement, challenging centuries of assumptions, and she was witnessing history unfold, in the midst of the battle. Valera caught herself thinking not about her role as a princess or diplomat, not about duty, but about the human beside her. His audacity, his confidence, his sheer refusal to adhere to expectation. It was maddening and inspiring. The bond between them, forged in necessity, was strengthening, tempered by shared danger. She realized that she trusted him more than she had trusted any officer, any ally, any ruler, and in that trust was a dangerous, thrilling sense of dependency, recognition that without him, victory was impossible. As the final wave of the Sarthok attack crumbled, the fleet's formation collapsed entirely. Human ships, battered but unbroken, pressed forward, targeting the remaining command vessels with precision. Valera could see the Sarthak commander's frustration radiating through the comm signals, his confidence shattered, his plans undone. One by one, the enemy vessels succumbed, either destroyed outright or rendered inoperative. The scale of human ingenuity, combined with Rylan's leadership, had turned what should have been a massacre into a decisive triumph. When the battle finally ceased, the void was littered with debris, silent and ominous against the backdrop of distant stars. Valera allowed herself a moment to breathe, to take in what had occurred. Humans had achieved what Athari doctrine had declared impossible. They had defeated a superior fleet with minimal losses, not through brute force, but through cunning, adaptability, and audacity. Rylan approached her, his uniform scorched in places, but his demeanor calm, almost casual, as if leading a fleet into annihilation were just another day at the office. "We're not done," he said softly, almost a whisper, yet charged with energy. "This was the first act. The rest is up to us to finish." Valera's heart swelled with a mix of awe, respect, and something else, something she hadn't anticipated: hope. She had doubted humans, their methods, their unpredictability, even their very value in the galaxy's grand scheme. But now she saw clearly. Humans were not just adaptable, they were revolutionary. They could change the outcome of entire wars with audacity alone, and with Rylan at the helm, they could achieve the impossible. The princess stood beside the commander, staring out at the wreckage and the stars beyond. In that moment, she understood the full truth of their alliance, of their marriage. It was not just political, it was strategic, vital, and transformative. Humans, with their unpredictability and courage, were a force the galaxy had underestimated for too long, and she, bound to one of them, was at the very center of it. As the fleet regrouped, preparing for whatever came next, Valera realized that the Sarthak would never again underestimate humans, and perhaps neither would she. The aftermath of the first engagement left the human Etheri fleet, battered but unbroken, and the Sarthak, humiliated and disorganized, were now desperate. Valera moved through the cruiser's corridors, feeling a tension that thrummed like electricity in her veins. She had stood at observation decks, watched the battle unfold, and seen humans turn what should have been annihilation into triumph. But Rylan's calm demeanor suggested that the true challenge was yet to come. The enemy had been delayed, yes, but the Sarthak fleet was still vast, and their commanders were clever in their desperation. The coming days would test every ounce of human ingenuity, and Valera knew she would have to abandon every preconception she held about warfare. Rylan briefed the officers in a cavernous strategy room, holograms spinning and flickering with projected enemy movements. Valera stood beside him, noting how effortlessly he commanded attention. The humans did not look to him with fear or blind obedience. They listened because he understood what they could do, better than they did themselves. The Sarthak fleet had divided into 3 wings, attempting to encircle the human contingent. Rylan's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, and Valera's first instinct was to argue. "We will draw 2 wings into a controlled funnel," he explained, "using the terrain of this sector, the asteroid field, the radiation belts, the debris from their destroyed ships, and then we hit the 3rd wing directly, exploiting the chaos we create. Timing will be everything. If we fail, we lose everything." Valera felt her pulse quicken. The human plan relied not on overwhelming firepower, but on improvisation, on exploiting unpredictability, on forcing the Sarthak into mistakes. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Her people would have thrown their entire fleet at the largest enemy mass, calculating losses with cold precision. Yet humans operated on instinct, on risk, on audacity, and audacity, she realized, was terrifyingly effective. The fleet moved into position over the next cycle. Valera observed from the bridge, her eyes tracking every movement with acute focus. The human ships were smaller, more maneuverable, and they slipped between asteroids and radiation fields with astonishing grace. The Sarthak fleet pursued, confident that they were herding a weaker force into submission. Rylan watched the displays with an almost serene patience, his fingers tracing lines of projected movement like a maestro conducting a symphony. Then the trap was sprung. The first Sarthak wing entered the asteroid field, believing they had caught the humans in a corner. Instead, human vessels emerged from unexpected angles, striking vulnerable sides and disabling critical systems. Explosions rippled across the field as enemy ships collided with debris and precision, targeted fire, their formation unraveling like threads in a tapestry. Valera watched in awe as Rylan coordinated every maneuver, his commands almost instinctive, guiding human ships to strike in unison. It was during this chaos that Valera began to notice something deeper about humans, about Rylan himself. While the Athari relied on perfection and feared error, humans embraced the uncertainty of chance. They adapted, improvised, and exploited failure as opportunity. And Rylan, audacious and fearless, was the embodiment of that principle. She realized, with an unsettling thrill, that the marriage that had begun as political convenience had become a crucible, forging a partnership of equals in intellect, courage, and vision. At the second Sarthak wing advanced to relieve their trapped comrades, Rylan anticipated it, setting up a series of decoys, smaller human ships and drones that mimicked fleet signatures. The Sarthak commanders, deceived by the false signals, split their attention, leaving gaps that human ships penetrated with precision strikes. Entire dreadnoughts were disabled before the Sarthak even realized what had happened. Valera could feel the tension in the room, a collective focus among human and Ithari officers alike, each trusting Ryland's instincts even when they defied logic. By the time the final wing arrived, the Sarthak fleet was in disarray. Their lines were broken, communications fractured, morale shattered. Ryland's plan was clear. The third wing was strong but exposed, and it would face the full force of human ingenuity. Valera could hardly believe what she was witnessing: dozens of human ships weaving through enemy formations, striking critical nodes with uncanny precision, and retreating before the Sarthak could respond. It was a dance of destruction, beautiful in its efficiency and terrifying in its audacity. And then Ryland prepared the ultimate strike. The cruiser, massive yet maneuverable, carried a weapon experimental even by human standards, a singularity pulse capable of disrupting the Sarthak command network across multiple ships simultaneously. Valera watched as he calibrated the device, his hands steady, his mind focused. "This will either cripple their fleet or destroy us all," he said, his voice quiet, almost intimate, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. Valera felt a shiver of fear. The weapon was unlike anything her people had created, and the risks were immense. But she trusted him. She realized that human courage was not absence of fear, but the mastery of it, the ability to act decisively when others would hesitate. She placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of both reassurance and solidarity. Ryland glanced at her, a fleeting smile breaking the tension, and nodded. They were partners, bound by strategy, by circumstance, and now by mutual trust. The cruiser advanced into the heart of the Sarthak formation. The enemy commander, confident in the superiority of numbers and firepower, concentrated attacks on what seemed the largest threat, the cruiser itself. But Ryland had calculated every angle, every trajectory, exploiting weaknesses in targeting algorithms the Sarthak had not even considered. Human ships darted in and out of fire arcs, shielding the cruiser, distracting the enemy, and striking simultaneously at multiple points. The singularity pulse powered up, energy coalescing into a humming orb of impossible density. "Ready?" Ryland asked, voice calm. Valera nodded, heart pounding. The seconds stretched into eternity. The Sarthak commander issued orders to slow, their predictions already rendered obsolete by human unpredictability. And then, with a precision born of instinct and intellect combined, Ryland unleashed the pulse. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A wave of energy rippled outward, hitting the Sarthak command network, disrupting communications, guidance systems, and weapons control across dozens of vessels simultaneously. Ships spun out of control, weapons misfired, and the Sarthak formation collapsed entirely. Explosions erupted like fireworks in the void, the enemy fleet fragmenting into chaos. Valera could hardly believe her eyes. Hundreds of ships neutralized in a single strike, not by brute force but by human ingenuity. Ryland turned to her, expression unshaken, though the reality of the destruction around them was staggering. "It's done," he said simply. "The rest is mop." Valera felt a rush of exhilaration and disbelief. Humans had shattered an enemy fleet that her people had considered invincible, not through superior technology, but through audacity, improvisation, and daring. She realized that her understanding of power, of strategy, of what was possible, had been fundamentally transformed in hours. Humans were not merely a species, they were a force, an unpredictable, uncontainable, extraordinary force. As the surviving Sarthak ships fled, the human fleet pursued selectively, disabling critical engines and command systems, ensuring that no resurgence would be possible. Valera moved among the bridge crew, witnessing their energy, their confidence, their shared recognition of what had just been accomplished. There was no arrogance, no grandstanding, only the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly against impossible odds. Ryland's presence was magnetic, commanding without demanding, leading without dictating. Valera realized that this was why humans succeeded where the Ithari relied on hierarchy and rigid precision. Humans acted with initiative, adapted with creativity, and embraced the uncertainty of chaos. And Rylan, her husband, by political design but now partner by respect and trust, was the perfect embodiment of that philosophy. In the silence after the battle, Valera walked to the observation deck, staring at the remnants of the Sarthok fleet, drifting through the void. She felt a profound mixture of awe, respect, and something dangerously intimate for the human beside her. History would remember this engagement, not merely for the destruction inflicted, but for the revelation it offered. Humans were not to be underestimated. They could achieve what empires and fleets thought impossible, and they did it with a combination of daring, ingenuity, and the audacity to defy expectation. Rylan joined her at the viewport, shoulders brushing lightly, and for a moment, neither spoke. They watched the stars, the debris, the aftermath of chaos rendered into victory. "You did well," she said quietly, her voice carrying both admiration and something more tender, fragile yet real. "You didn't do so badly yourself," he replied, a smirk playing across his face. For a Etheri princess who thought humans were reckless, Valera felt a laugh escape her, genuine and unguarded. For the first time in her life, she felt the exhilaration of partnership, of trust, of discovery not merely political or strategic, but personal, profound. Humans, she realized, were not just a species, they were a revelation, and Rylan Cade was living proof of their extraordinary potential. And as the fleet regrouped for repairs and reorganization, preparing for the inevitable political fallout, Valera understood that the universe had changed in ways few could predict. Humans had shattered expectations, redefined strategy, and proven that audacity, courage, and ingenuity could topple even the mightiest empires. She also understood that she would never look at war, diplomacy, or even herself the same way again. The stars outside the viewport shimmered, indifferent yet magnificent, and Valera knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and unsettled her, that humans and the human beside her would continue to defy every expectation the galaxy held. They were extraordinary, and she, bound to one of them, was now part of a force that would shape the destiny of countless worlds. The Sarthak remnants scattered across the void, limping toward uncharted sectors, their fleet broken and their command structure shattered. Valera stood on the observation deck of the human cruiser, eyes fixed on the drifting wreckage, her mind still reeling from the audacity and brilliance of what had just occurred. The battle had not been a simple victory, it had been a revelation. Humanity, through Commander Rylan Cade, had proven that the galaxy's assumptions about strength, tactics, and strategy were dangerously incomplete. She felt an unfamiliar warmth of pride, not in her people, not in herself, but in the humans beside her, and in the realization that she had become part of this unprecedented force. Rylan appeared at her side without a sound, his presence familiar yet commanding. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the gravity of their triumph to settle between them. "They'll be back," he said finally, voice calm, almost casual, though she could detect the underlying certainty that humans thrived on. Any species that underestimates humans eventually learns the hard way, but by then, it's often too late. Valera turned to him, her violet eyes bright and calculating. "And what of diplomacy? The councils, my people will demand explanation for this anomaly. They will want to know how a fleet deemed inferior shattered one of the largest armadas in the sector." Rylan shrugged lightly, his smirk teasing but knowing. "Let them demand. We've done what they couldn't. Results matter more than tradition. Besides, humans have a way of changing expectations. You'll see, they'll either follow or they'll get left behind." She studied him for a long moment. Humans, she realized, were not just unpredictable, they were transformative. They didn't merely respond to circumstance, they created it, and Rylan, bold, audacious, and brilliant, had become the catalyst for that transformation. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. In her lifetime, she had seen the rigidity of empires and the failures of predictability. Yet humans, for all their seeming recklessness, had rewritten the rules of engagement entirely. The aftermath of the battle demanded attention. Human ships moved efficiently through the debris field, salvaging what could be saved and ensuring that no Sarthak vessel could regroup. The fleet's engineering teams worked with precision and speed, repairing damage, reinforcing shields, and preparing for the next inevitable engagement. Valera, despite her status as a princess, was drawn into the process. She worked alongside officers, observed the logistics, and saw firsthand the efficiency born not of fear or control, but of trust, initiative, and adaptability. Humans trusted each other and themselves in ways the Ithari never had. The Starthak, humiliated and defeated, sent emissaries in hopes of negotiating a ceasefire. Valera sat beside Rylan during the diplomatic exchanges, her presence both symbolic and practical. She had married this human for diplomacy, for alliance, for survival, but now, she realized, the marriage had become a symbol of human ingenuity itself. The emissaries were cautious, hesitant, awed by what they had witnessed. Rylan spoke with measured authority, guiding the discussions with a subtle brilliance that ensured the humans retained control without appearing domineering. Every word, every gesture, reinforced the reality they had created. Humans were not just participants in the galaxy, they were a force to be reckoned with. Valera watched the negotiations, noting the mix of fear and respect in the Sarthok delegates. For the first time, she felt a sense of exhilaration not tied to ceremony or protocol, but to recognition of something larger. Humanity, chaotic and audacious, had forced an empire to reconsider its assumptions, and she, bound to a human whose vision and courage had done what decades of diplomacy could not, felt a profound sense of purpose and belonging, even in private. Away from the scrutiny of officers and emissaries, the dynamic between them had shifted. Rylan was not just her husband by decree, he was her partner in every sense. He had exposed her to a universe of possibilities she had never imagined, a universe in which ingenuity, courage, and audacity could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. She felt herself growing, changing not merely politically, but intellectually and emotionally. Humans, she realized, were contagious in their boldness. As repairs concluded and the fleet prepared to return to Ithari space, Valera and Rylan stood on the observation deck once more. The stars seemed alive with potential, distant suns reflecting off the armored hulls of their vessels. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "if the galaxy is ready for us?" For humans, Rylan's gaze met hers, calm, unwavering. "It doesn't matter if they're ready. They'll adapt or they'll get out of the way. Humans don't wait for permission. We act. That's what makes us dangerous and brilliant." She smiled faintly, a mixture of admiration and something softer, more intimate. "And reckless," she added, though the word was not accusatory. She had learned to see risk not as a flaw but as opportunity, the way humans did. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that echoed lightly in the empty deck. "Sometimes, but calculated risk is different from recklessness, and you're learning it too, even if you don't admit it." Valera's eyes softened. She had trained for decades in discipline, strategy, and control. But humans had taught her something different, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. That adaptability was more powerful than perfection. That audacity could topple empires. She had married a human for diplomacy, but she had gained something more, a partnership that transcended politics, a glimpse into a potential the Ithari had never cultivated. The fleet re-entered Ithari space, greeted not with celebration alone, but with awe and scrutiny. Councils and advisors demanded explanations, reports, and analysis. Valera presented herself alongside Rylan, a visible testament to the results of their alliance. The humans' triumph, the audacity of the battle, and the sheer brilliance of their tactics left even the most skeptical Ithari officers stunned. For centuries, the Empire had relied on precision and predictability. Now, they had been shown the power of unpredictability. Rylan addressed the councils with quiet authority, framing the victory not as a fluke, but as proof of human potential. Valera watched him, aware that history would remember this day not only for the destruction of the Sarthok fleet, but for the demonstration that humans were an unprecedented force in the galaxy. She felt a swell of pride, tempered by recognition that this was only the beginning. Humans were not done, never done, and with Rylan at the forefront, they would continue to redefine what was possible. Later, in private quarters, the enormity of their accomplishments settled over her. Valera and Rylan sat across from each other, the weight of shared experiences lingering between them. The battle, the diplomacy, the audacity, all of it had forged a bond she had not anticipated. She had married him for politics, for necessity, but now she understood that their partnership was forged in something stronger: trust, respect, and the shared knowledge that together they could reshape the galaxy. "You changed everything," she said softly, her voice unguarded for the first time. "Not just the battle, not just the Everything. He reached across, taking her hand, a rare intimacy that needed no ceremony or approval. "We did it together," he said. We're powerful, yes, but only when we act as one. And you were part of it. More than you realize." Valera felt a warmth she had never known, a sense of connection that transcended tradition and duty. She realized that humans were not only extraordinary in battle, they inspired courage, ingenuity, and transformation in those around them. And she, bound to one of them, had become part of a force greater than any empire, greater than any council, greater than any expectation. The days that followed were a whirlwind of strategy sessions, fleet reorganizations, and political discussions. The Ithari Empire began to shift its understanding of power, its rigid doctrines challenged by the demonstration of human ingenuity. Valera watched as her own people, initially skeptical, began to embrace new tactics, new ways of thinking. Humans had not just won a battle, they had catalyzed evolution in thought and strategy, forcing even a proud, ancient empire to reconsider the meaning of strength. Through it all, Rylan remained calm, composed, and unyielding. He did not seek accolades or authority. He sought results, innovation, and the opportunity to push the boundaries of what was possible. Valera found herself inspired, learning to think in new dimensions, to act with audacity, and to embrace uncertainty as a tool rather than a threat. She understood, in the most profound sense, that humans were not merely a species, they were a revolution. One evening, standing again on the observation deck, Valera spoke quietly, more to herself than to Rylan. "I married you for diplomacy, but I gained something far greater. I see now what humans are capable of. I see what we together are capable of." Rylan's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering, "And the galaxy will see it too. One strike, one decision, one act of audacity can change everything. That's humanity." The stars stretched endlessly before them, indifferent and eternal. Yet for the first time, Valera felt aligned with something greater than duty or tradition. She understood that humans, unpredictable and brilliant, were the catalysts of change, and she had become inseparable from that change. History would remember the battle, the victory, and the audacity. But Valera knew the truth. It was the humans and, one human in particular, who had shattered expectations and shown the universe that audacity, ingenuity, and courage could redefine reality. As the fleet settled into orbit around Ithari command space, Valera stood beside Rylan, feeling a sense of peace and purpose she had never known. The Sarathak threat had been neutralized, yes, but more importantly, a paradigm had shifted. Humans had demonstrated that the impossible was merely a challenge waiting for audacity, and she, bound to one of them, had witnessed it firsthand. Rylan's hand found hers again, the gesture simple but profound. "The universe is bigger than we thought," he said softly, "and we've just begun to explore what we can do." Valera nodded, heart full. She had married a human for diplomacy, for political alliance, and in doing so, she had discovered something infinitely greater. Humans were extraordinary, uncontainable, and transformative. And at the center of it all, guiding, daring, and inspiring, was Rylan Cade. Together, they had changed the course of history, and she knew the galaxy would never be the same. The stars outside stretched infinitely, silent witnesses to the audacity and brilliance that had unfolded. Valera understood, with perfect clarity, that this was only the beginning. Humans had shattered the enemy fleet with one strike, but, more importantly, they had shattered expectations. And she, a princess of a proud empire, was now a part of that extraordinary force. The universe waited, and humans, unpredictable and brilliant, were ready.